Hey guys, welcome back to another video with our series on ancient Greece. Today we are continuing, getting kind of close to the end here. It's our last week on ancient Greece, so I'll have like 3, 4, 5 episodes dropping this week, so get ready for that. Today we are talking about the groundbreaking philosophy of ancient Greece, and mainly talking about the big three. We've got Socrates, we've got Plato, we got Aristotle. Of course there were others, but those are kind of the three main guys who contributed a lot to the philosophical tradition that continues to this day. And so, first of all, we have Socrates, who was born in 470 BC and he died in 399 BC. He was said to be rather an ugly guy, and then he kind of like a satyr, and that's the mythical creature with goat feet. So he was kind of ugly, but he was a really smart guy. He had a few key doctrines, one being that knowledge is virtue, so to know is to be virtuous. That was his view on things, and that the first place to start is acknowledging your own ignorance, right? So you got to understand that you know nothing in order to begin to know things. And so he's considered the wisest man in Athens because he firmly held to that belief. Now, we have the Socratic dialect as well, which is this idea of asking everyday questions in order to get to the fundamentals or certain principles of whatever the subject matter is. So if you think about shoemaking, and you're talking to a shoemaker, you ask him, what makes a shoe? And then you keep breaking down each of his answers until you get to the fundamental laws that all shoemakers have to follow in order to make a shoe. That would be one example. And then he also believed that the art of the good life. So in order to live a good life, you need to know what the good life is. That is what his view on it is. This very much a logo sort of logical view. And Aristotle later corrected him, whatever your guys' take on it, that Socrates didn't take into account that man has feelings, instincts, and passions, and that knowing what virtue is isn't the most important thing, but being virtuous is. It is better to be courageous than to know what courage is. So it is better to be doing the virtue rather than knowing what the virtue is first and foremost, if you had to pick one or the other. And the big thing with Socrates also is his trial. The Athenian government accused him of the corruption of the youth and impiety. And so with the corruption of the youth, Socrates was, through his teachings, making the youth basically hate the Athenian government and the democratic structure of democracy, because Socrates saw it as it's basically sheep without a shepherd, and not everyone's vote should actually count equally because some are wiser than others. And so a lot of his students and followers were taking to that view, and so that was seen as corruption of the youth. And in terms of impiety, Socrates didn't worship the traditional gods of the state. He rather worshipped his own new deities, such as, I think it was wisdom. I'll have to double check back on it, but things like that. And so that was also a very big deal because the gods are very important to the ancient Greek culture. And then also, he was condemned to death by I think a margin of 30, and he said that he wasn't surprised that such a corrupt government would condemn him, and his final words that he said was, now it is time for me to be off, I to die and for you to live, but whoever has the better prospect, God only knows. The reason we know about the trial of Socrates is because one of his students, Plato, was there to record it and give us all the information that we have from it, so that's how we know about it. And Socrates never wrote anything, and all we have from Socrates are what Plato wrote, claiming that these were the words of Socrates. And then, so Socrates, a little more about him. He was born in 472 BC, and he founded the school of philosophy called the Academy. And this was named after the Greek man Academus, which is, and he owned the garden where the Academy was founded, so that's why he called it that. And Plato's whole goal was to lead men to live morally good lives, so that was his goal. And his big work, his magnum opus, is called the Republic, and in the Republic there's a bunch of Socratic dialogues asking important questions, what is justice, what is fortitude, what is goodness, and even more basic, what is a triangle, what is a tree, what is whiteness. And so, for example, getting into a little bit about his ideas of reality, we have this piece of paper here, and the characteristics of the piece of paper are it's rectangular, it's white, and it's thin. Like that's some of the characteristics of this piece of paper. But the idea of rectangularity or any of the other characteristics existed before the paper and will continue to exist after the piece of paper. And so this is where the idea of the two worlds come into play. So Plato believed in these two worlds. There's this one eternal perfect world that has all these ideals that perfectly exist. So there's the perfect triangle, there's the perfect square, there's the perfect dog, there's the perfect tree, and then there is the changing and imperfect world, which is basically the world that we live in a sort of way. And so these two worlds basically overlap. And so then there's the senses of our body, so what we see, what we touch, what we smell, and things like that, and how we experience that. And then there's and within our soul is the eternal and perfect world, and so that's how we experience that. And so then what comes into play, practically speaking, is there's the idea and the form. And so there's the idea of the square in this perfect ideal world, which would be manifested in like this coaster. There's like the idea of the square is manifested in the coaster, but that's not all that the coaster is. And the most famous writings of Plato that most people probably know about is called the Allegory of the Cave. Now, the Allegory of the Cave is basically about there's a tribe of people, and they're all chained to this wall, and their back is to the entrance. So they're just kind of like back here, and then all they can see is what is in front of them. And from behind them, there are these people that come in that carry different sorts of statue and objects, and the little bit of the sun that shines through in the cave, it basically will reflect the shadows of the objects they are carrying for the tribe to see. And so basically all the shadows are what their perceived reality is, and so that's all they see. And so that's the situation we are in. And then basically one of the prisoners, who is a philosopher, escapes, and he's brought into the real world, and he sees the light and he sees the full truth. And it hurts at first because his eyes were used to this darkness, but then he finally sees the beauty and truth of what he saw. Like there's so much more to life and reality than the shadows that were in the cave. And so when he tries to share it with them, they scorn him, they laugh him off and think he's nothing, and you could even be killed for this, which is probably how Plato viewed what happened to Socrates. Socrates saw the light, and then the government of Athens condemned him to death for just trying to bring in the reality. So things don't always seem what they appear to be. We are so often living in the shadows and don't see the full truth of things. And then Plato's view on humanity is that the truest part of the man is his soul, and that we are prisoners of our body. And he believes that humans once lived in the perfect and eternal world, but then we did something wrong which made us become punished, and now we are living in the imperfect world. And so our body's a prison, and then that's probably where the idea of the Gnostics come from, in later centuries. And then Plato's view of knowledge is that it's the remembrance of the world of ideas. So basically anything we know that is true, it's basically us calling back from our ancestral home of the perfect world, basically. And another fun fact is that Plato means broad shoulders, and there's basically this myth that during arguments, he would basically, instead of arguing, he would just flex on them, because he was a wrestler, and he would basically flex to show that he's stronger and then win the argument. And not a lot is known about the death of Plato. Some say he died at some wedding feast, and some say that he died from lice. But for this video, that's all I've got for you guys today. We will continue with the philosophers. We'll be talking about Aristotle in the context of Alexander the Great, since Aristotle was Alexander the Great's teacher. So we'll get to him then. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you liked this video. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you later this week.